Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Let's see. I wonder which screen you can see today. I have that extra monitor, and so sometimes Zoom picks up that one. Sometimes it picks up my laptop screen, so I'm never quite sure. When we get going, I'll ask you. How is the lab going? Has anybody tried their experiment yet?
I haven't got to it yet.
No, nobody, not yet. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling that it would get left till the last minute. It's the usual. That's all right. Okay. Any questions about the lab besides that? I mean, there's only 4 of you here so far, so maybe you don't. Okay. It's the last week of classes. It's pretty remarkable. Okay. All right. I think there's I can choose desktop. Okay, so can you see the glacier slides?
Yeah.
Awesome. Gunk on my contact moment. Okay. So, I also have I learn. Okay. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Okay. So it's 10:30, so I'm just going to get going, and everybody who comes in late can watch the recording, I suppose. Or maybe it's going to be light attendance today. Anyway, what we're going to do for the last part of class is focus on, sorry, I'm going to ask you one more time. Can you see the iLearn page on my screen now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So last week, sorry, yes, thank you. So last week we started to cover landslides. I did a bit of explaining or lecturing on Thursday about landslides before we jumped into the lab. This week, and you know what, I went back and I supplemented those slides. I put the slides on iLearn, and I added, remember there, we were talking about erosion and just what old landscapes look like compared to young ones with Kauai and that national park where there's a deep canyon. And I'm just going to show you the slides because I am not describing it well. I think that's the best thing to do anyway. Come on. Okay. I'm not going to focus on this, but at least let me show you the images. So we were talking about, we had this question in terms of thinking about Hawaii, which islands are growing, which islands are shrinking, or rather eroding. And we looked at this map showing in the southeast, that's where the active volcanism is. And the northwest is where the islands, they're no longer being fed by magma. There's no new lavas. And so they're eroding and sinking, basically. Eroding away, sinking into the water, if you like. Sea level is rising too. This is what I was trying to get at with these like Jurassic Park stream channels that just cut down so deeply into this landscape. It's really spectacular. This is what Kauai looks like from the air, and it's some of these like this part, these parts that look from the ocean that look like these fantastically eroded canyons. Now there's Waimea Canyon here that's kind of like the Grand Canyon of Hawaii. It really does, except for the vegetation, it really looks like the Grand Canyon. And notice the really red soil too from the oxidation of iron in the basalt rocks that are being erupted there. So I wanted to make sure that you saw those images so that we can make some comparisons. What else? We looked, I can't exactly remember where we left off. I think we got to here. We were talking, well, I had, oops, what did I do? That's right. Okay. So comparing the landslide susceptibility map to the precipitation map for California, and noticing that there are the highest landslide susceptible areas have the highest amount of rain in general, except for this area. That's a little weird. So there's a lot of rain here, but not very many landslides. And just to review, you guys suggested that it was because of the glaciers had scraped away a lot of the soil and removed what slides, the overburden. I like this diagram because it shows sort of the range of types of mass movements, from very slow creeping soils like this, a slump, which mostly keeps the land intact, but it slumps down with gravity. And then we've got debris flows that can be very liquid. I guess a landslide would be sort of in between a slump and a debris flow. A dry version of this being, that's the debris flow is different from slumping in that it's like a just mixture. What is the word I'm trying to look for? A jumbled up mixture of rock and soil and vegetation and trees and whatever, compared to an intact block. Then there's rock falls that are the fastest. So this end is the fastest processes, this end is the slowest processes. And rock falls are fast because it's just a big hunk of rock that drops down quickly. I don't think I showed you some of these videos. These are spectacular. Check these out. We're just going to do this for a few minutes and then we'll get to the glaciers that I wanted to talk about. Come on now. Why isn't it working? Uh-oh. I'm going to try, well, let's see. Are my other videos working? Okay, so this video is actually listed on iLearn. So let me just quickly go here. So for the mass wasting lab, I think I put them here. Yes, okay. So I gave you a lot of extra supplemental information on the lab page. This is the list of hazard maps that you were looking at as part of the breakout rooms. And these are some videos that talk about the angle of repose. These videos, this shows you like the range of different mass movement processes, from landslide to a mudslide. This is the one that I was talking about. We'll do that in a sec. Rock falls in Yosemite. That's a bit of a longer one, but it's a great video. Creep and slumps. This one is impressive. Here, let me just show you a couple of these. All right. So this is actual speed. This is Italy. That is crazy. It is a huge debris flow. It's not super fast moving, but it's pretty fast. There's a van up there for scale. So these are just whole trees that are going along with. Incredible. I don't speak Italian, but I speak that word. So this is just, I mean, it goes on and on and on. I encourage you to watch the whole thing and to come and look at all of these. Let me show you this one in Norway. It's amazing. Oh, well, after the ad. Here we go. So this slump, there's a crack that's breaking. It's taken houses with it. And there's even a house already floating in the water in the fjord here, a couple of them. This whole hunk of land is just slumping off into the fjord. And you can get the idea of how big it is because of the houses. And it's clearly moving along a surface here that's wet from probably rainfall or some other triggering event. I doubt it was an earthquake in Norway, but this would suck, right? Anyway, it's coming from the other side as well. So the guy turns around and looks at the other side. It's a huge slump. So totally check those out. I gave you some ideas for building. This is the best image that I could find, kind of like the before images of what your landslide experiment might look like. These are clearly done in a lab setting. They've got sensors in them, or those might be sprinklers. I'm not sure, but they've covered the soil with grass here, and it looks different. I didn't find the different, like how these three were different, but they're different. They look different. So you're just building one. Have some idea that you're going to test when you make this. Are you going to put little trees in it that could just be like parts of plants or sticks or a little branch off of a bush that you stick in the soil? Are you going to put a little house on it? Are you going to try to create a neighborhood or build a road or something like that? Create a cliff? Or is it just going to be like a smooth slope like this? And then you're going to rain on the whole terrain. So have an idea. Make sure you're taking a picture of the before setup. You're also going to sketch the before setup before you rain on your landscape. And then I want you to rain on it. And you start off with a little bit and see what happens. And then maybe increase that to a lot of rain, especially if it's not going anywhere, right? You should probably do some like packing down of the soil. You don't want it to be completely loose and fluffy soil, right? Pack it down a little bit so it's kind of realistic. You can leave some areas that are looser or whatever, and see what happens. See if you can create one of the mass movements that are listed here, a creep or a rock fall or a mudslide or debris flow. And then, are there any questions about that while I'm talking about the experiment? You want to, like, as you're raining on the terrain, you want to watch, make observations. What happens? What moves first? Be descriptive, be thorough, like include some details so that I understand what you did and what it looked like after. Take some after pictures if there's anything left, so that you can describe what you're talking about and stick those in your the written report. That would be fantastic. I don't ask for an after picture, but that would be great. And then you can maybe even annotate. So just insert that image into your lab worksheets. Then at the end, there's a part of your lab, the version that I gave out to you in class suggested that I was going to assign one of these. I decided to let you choose. I didn't want to try to assign, and frankly, it didn't matter to me which one you looked at. I just want you to study one of them. So pick one that interests you most. Like maybe it's a San Francisco landslide / rockfall, sort of somewhere in between. Or maybe it's the landslides, the rock falls in Yosemite Valley. Or maybe you are from Washington State and you want to look at that, the landslide that preceded the Mount St. Helens eruption. So there's some videos, there's some photos, there's written descriptions of these events. Nothing is super detailed. I mean, it's detailed enough. It's not like super long is what I mean. So any of them are about the same. And so just choose one. There you go. So I had those in the landslide lab folder. So go check those out. And I just want to, before we get to this, please stop me with any questions. I'm not looking at Zoom. It's over here on a different screen, but I suppose I should keep the chat open for you guys. Well, and so that I can see. Okay, so go check those out.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, in that experiment where you want us to like add a landslide
Yeah.
for the lab, it said add erosion. What do you mean by like add erosion?
You're going to be eroding with rain. You're going to be raining, doing an experimental rain setup that is going to take away some of your soil. It's going to erode some of the soil. You're going to create a landslide or a debris flow or something like that on a very small scale. That's the erosion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like but like a rain, can we use like a if it doesn't rain, can we use like a
No, you're doing the rain. You're not setting up for it to rain outside. You're gonna find some way of like sprinkling water on it to like represent rain.
Okay.
Okay. I am gonna.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are we recording the erosion?
No, you're not recording. You're not. I mean, that would be kind of cool. If you want to make a video, go for it. You could, I suppose you could substitute a short video recording your observations, like talking about what you're doing and what's happening instead of writing it up.
Okay.
That would be all right with me,
Okay.
as long as you're addressing all the questions that I've got there. That's fine with me if you want to record. But no, it's not a requirement.
Okay.
You're just taking the before pictures so that I can see what you did. And an after picture would be great, but mostly I just want a description of what happened.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I am going to not continue with the mass movement slides. They are online, the new version, these ones are online. You can go ahead and take a look at the images. It supplements your reading, really, talking about like looking at landslides. This is just like the setup with Devil's Slide here on Highway 1 and why we have the Tum Lantos Tunnel, I think that's its name, right here, is because there are a bunch of seafloor sediments, cherts, that are, they're actually turbidites. They're those turbidity currents. And so it's the lithified version of the turbidity currents that are the underwater landslides. Anyway, the bedding there dips toward the ocean, and every winter it seemed like when there was a big storm, there would be a great big rock fall where they would just slide along the bedding plane and, you know, along a weak shale layer, not a sandy layer. It would be always the finer material, the more erodible material. And then it would slide along that plane. So in this instance, here's like a sandy layer on top of a shale layer, the blackish layer. And then it would slide like this, like you just lose some of it. Except this was over Highway 1 and into the ocean. So there are some things like that. I you know, it supplements in talking about how topography or even the material after volcanic eruptions can be an issue, heavy rainfall, that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm gonna put those away. Any other questions about any kind of landslides, any of that sort? While you're thinking about whether you have questions, I'm just going to say, this is our last week of classes. So we only have 2 meeting days. There's no new lab this week. You're just going to do and complete your landslide lab. The biggest part being your experiment, really. And then I directed you to the lab folder to find the videos and the pictures and everything that you need to finish the lab. Those links are in the lab, but just because of the way you paste a URL into text, sometimes it doesn't, like when you double click on it, it won't read it correctly. And so it says it can't find the file or the page. That's why I put them on the lab folder. So if you can't link directly, go ahead and go there. We've been talking about like sedimentary rocks and coastal processes, landslides. There's a common theme in those that it's water. And so that's going to be the final lecture on Thursday, is about surface water and groundwater and the things that I want you to know most about floods and being careful, like in desert terrains and flash floods and other things like that. So some natural hazards and just some explaining of how these processes work. A little bit about pollution and contaminating wells, that kind of thing. That'll be Thursday. I hope that you can try or at least start, because the lab is due on Friday. I want you to just finish it this week and not carry it over to finals week. You've got plenty of studying to do for all your classes. So finish it this week. Don't wait until Friday to start. I hope that you can give the experiment a shot, and then maybe you'll be able to ask me questions on Thursday. If you could try today or tomorrow, that would be fantastic. Today, frozen water, glaciers and ice caps. We're going to talk about ice. This is chapter 14. Oh, I've sacrificed deserts. I decided that we couldn't fit in deserts, but I'm going to talk just a little bit in the water on Thursday about flash floods and desert terrain. So I'll sneak it in that way, but I'm not going to talk about the windblown processes that are active in desert landscapes, because I felt like there's less of a chance you're going to interact with, you're going to find yourself in a desert terrain than you are in maybe near a glacier, especially if you're a skier. I'm not a skier. There was a bad incident on the bunny slope with a slow sign that I have not fully gotten over, and I still can't feel my left shin very well. There's nerve damage from like 20 years ago. It was bad. Anyway, that was kind of it for downhill skiing and me. Okay. So as I laugh to myself here alone and I hear nothing out of you guys. It's okay. It's okay. I'm used to like not having the response from you guys. I entertain myself. Okay, so the chapter focuses on differentiating glaciers from sea ice and ice caps that are also glaciers. Remember, I mentioned that glaciers are permanent ice, so they don't melt during the summer and then get deposited after a new snowstorm. It's there year round and they flow. That's the other part of it. Under the immense pressure of the overlying ice, because these things are thick, they fill up these U-shaped valleys and they're erosive. They scrape away rock and everything else. I'm going to talk about the landforms and like that's some of the same things that your chapter talks about. I'm going to show you the erosional and the depositional landforms, moraines, and the U-shaped valleys are erosion and deposition. And then a little bit about the history of past glaciations and their relationship to sea level changes and climate differences. In addition to the material in your chapter, and that is covered by the online quiz on iLearn that is there since yesterday. So it's a relatively short quiz. It's 20 questions on glaciers. So hopefully after the lecture today, you'll be fine and able to take that quiz. We're going to look at how 70% of Earth's fresh water is locked up in glaciers and on ice caps. 70%, it's huge. I'll differentiate between alpine versus continental glaciers. We'll look at North American glaciation, especially the last major glaciation that we had, the U-shaped valleys that they form. Landforms like arête, this should have a little, is it accent aigu? No, it's the little caret. It should be over the E. I didn't go back to try to find that. Arête, a cirque, a horn, and a hanging valley. Those are all terms that you run across in the chapter and today. Chatter marks, glacial polish, the grooves that you find in rock. Glacial erratics are things that form as a result of erosion by the glacial ice. Moraines, the medial are the middle ones, the lateral are on the sides, and the end moraines of a glacier. They all include poorly sorted material. We talked about that in the sedimentary rocks and processes lecture. And includes some like really large boulders that can be left behind because ice, it has a high viscosity. It's much higher than water, right? It can pick up large things. We're going to look at some evidence of past climate change from ice cores, including oxygen isotopes and carbon dioxide records that are like how we reconstruct past climate. This is something that climate change and looking at not ice cores, at least in our department, we have a faculty member, Petra Deakins, who is a paleoceanographer, which means that she uses, and I think I've mentioned this before, she has gone out on the drill ships that are available that go out. She went to the Indian Ocean in the Bay of Bengal, I think, and they took core out of the Bay of Bengal and they pull the core out, and you can, half of it is preserved and half gets used for experiments because it's so expensive to go out there and actually do the coring. it's important to save a record. And so there's a place in Houston, Texas, where all of this core is stored. But you can use microfossils, little tiny diatoms, radiolaria. What's the other one? I'm not thinking of it. There are 3 little bugs that get used, a tiny little plankton-sized shells that are left behind in the sediment. And those live at certain parts of the water column and that are temperature controlled. And so she looks at the sea surface temperatures from the past, and that's done from these cores. And that's something that you could do even as an undergraduate if you wanted to, if you're interested in any of this stuff. I encourage you to think about majoring, especially if you're a freshman or you're a sophomore. You have the opportunity to switch still and work on some issues like this. This could lead to an undergraduate research project. We also have the SF Scholars program, which is a 4+1 program where you do like 4 years of undergrad work, but you start some graduate work, research in your 5th year, and then continue it, in your 4th year, continue it in your 5th year. And you get your master's and your bachelor's in 5 years. We have another faculty member, Zan Stein, Alexander, but he goes by Zan Stein, who he's an oceanographer and works on waves. And I'm sure he still does, but like his main project right now is taking cores out of trees in the Sierra Nevada up near the tree line. So at very high elevations, not terribly high latitudes, but elevations. And he looks at the width. There's something about the character of the cells that are grown, and you know how trees have rings, right? When you take a core, it just looks like a bunch of stripes. And he lays that out and they photograph it really carefully, and they measure the thickness of the winter and the summer layers. There's a winter and a summer part of the ring for each year. And so you look at those seasons and study what the cells look like in the tree rings, and that tells you something about past climate. So that's another project that you could start as an undergraduate. So yeah, it could totally lead to a grad school adventure, which I loved. I love graduate school. It's not for everybody though. It's you don't get homework. You're not given deadlines for all this stuff like your homework's due on Friday. You kind of have to work on your own schedule. You have to be self-motivated, self-driven. Not as an undergraduate in one of these projects, like you'll get advising for sure, but as a grad student, I'm saying. Okay, enough about that, but I just wanted to mention that because there, like Petra's projects on the Bay of Bengal cores, she goes down to UC Santa Cruz and they use a mass spectrometer to measure, I think it's oxygen and carbon isotopes. And they use those in combination. So there's laboratory work involved. You might even end up on one of those research vessels. Although I'm not sure, I don't think I would ever want to be stuck on one of them. I guess they have internet now. They didn't used to in the old days. But you're out there for weeks and you're just on a ship and you have to work like 12-hour days. It's a lot of work. Okay, I'm getting off on this tangent. I want to talk about glacial periods and interglacial periods and show you how that relates to sea level changes. That's something I've already started to talk about. And then I'm going to talk about the Milankovitch cycle. I should have named it here. Milankovitch cycle, which is it has to do with Earth's tilt angle towards the sun, the shape of the orbit around the sun, and how much wobbling the Earth does on its rotational axis. So as it's spinning like this, there's some amount of wobble. But it creates, I should have said, it's 41,000 to 100,000 year cycles. Should have come back and fixed that. Anyway, there we are. So you can see those cycles in the paleoclimate data, and it's remarkable how predictable it is. And then we'll talk about surface temperatures on Earth. Please stop me with questions or put something in the chat. With my extra screen, I can now read it, so which is awesome. Okay. These links, most of these links, like I told you that I borrowed some slides. This one is, these are mostly mine, but I still borrowed some, and all of the links are all outdated, and they're only like a few years old, but all those pages are gone. Okay, Earth's water. 2.5% of Earth's water is fresh water, and 96.5% is salt water in the oceans. There's a small percentage of saline groundwater and saline lakes, like Mono Lake or the Dead Sea, something like that. So, right, so we have a precious resource in the fresh water. And if you were to break up the fresh water into different parts, you would see that glaciers and ice caps are like 70%. I'm just rounding up. 70% of the fresh water and 30% is groundwater. And only 1.3% of the fresh water is actually on the surface of the Earth. That would be lakes and rivers and creeks and ponds and all of that. It's a tiny amount of the water that we've got. I mean, this is part of the reason why, of course, someone would call me in the middle of lecture. This is why, you know, people have tried. The Israelis have gotten this down into an amazing science, but to transform salt water from the oceans to fresh water that's potable, that you can drink. It's hard to do, and it's an expensive thing, but in desert areas, which could, you know, maybe in the future for Southern California or like Las Vegas, there needs to be more fresh water as more and more people move to those places. The fresh water that we have, like LA, I say LA, but I mean Southern California, takes a lot of the water from the Sierra Nevada that would otherwise come to us here, and we pipe it down to Southern California. So there's a big history. There's a big history of California, of battles over water that are interesting. There are lots of books that you can read on the topic. Cadillac Desert is a great one. It's old, but it's great. Okay, and I suppose I'll break this down. So the surface water is mostly ice and snow, 73%, and 20% lakes, 3.5% soil moisture, then rivers, biological water. I think that means in plants and animals, plants only, probably, atmospheric water. So there's water in the air that we breathe. So a lot of Earth's fresh water is in ice and snow. Okay. How do glaciers form? It basically, they start forming at high elevations and at high latitudes. What do I mean by high latitudes? High elevation is just how high you climb in the mountains, right? So up near the peaks of mountains, is
How
the air
north
is,
or south?
sorry, say that again.
I was saying how far north or south of
Yes,
the
thank
equator?
you. Thank you. So high latitudes means like if you're going towards the poles, if you're climbing, 0 degrees latitude is the equator. So high latitude would be like 50, 60, 70 degrees north or south would get you into areas that are cooler than places near the equator, which is logical, but until you actually like think about it and study the earth, maybe you don't realize. Okay, so you start off where the snow doesn't melt in the summer. So a permanent snowpack. Over time, with enough accumulation, you start to form glaciers that are actual ice and that actually flows. So it's permanent ice and it flows. It forms features like crevasses that can be very large and hard to climb over. The scale is really difficult to see here. I don't think this is a huge glacier. I think people were climbing to take or hiking to take this picture. There's a little, these glacial lakes are given a special name. I don't expect you to remember it, but I'll just tell you, it's a tarn. And they could form as a result of any meltwater that's coming along the base of the glacier. So there's kind of a liquid layer of water that forms between the ice and the rock that helps the glacier to move. And you can form like little streams underneath the glacier that come out in these tarns. So this ice, the water ice, kind of transforms, it goes under like a metamorphosis, kind of like a rock, but it is not a metamorphic rock. I would not call that. I think they're saying it is actually a metamorphic rock. I don't think I would call it a rock. That's bizarre. I mean, ice is a mineral, right? Yes, we established that way back when we talked about minerals. But if ice is a mineral and you've got permanent, naturally occurring ice, is it a metamorphic rock? That's a bizarre thing to think about. I think I'm going to vote no on that one, just on the grounds that it's water. Okay. I think it should have to have certainly more than one mineral in it to be a rock. Okay, so the ice crystals actually undergo recrystallization in the glacier. And so it is different from just like snowpack. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay, we don't have neighbors. I don't want to start a breakout group because it just takes so long to go back and forth. So I don't want to do that. I want you to just do a brainstorming on your own exercise and think about where do glaciers form. I've already started talking about it. What determines whether glaciers grow or they shrink, whether they recede or they grow longer. And here's a question. Has anybody seen a glacier before? You can vote with a hand, one of the green hands, or you can say type yes in the chat or click the yes button in the participants window. It would be great to see some interaction. No, so nobody? Oh. You got to get somewhere where you can see. I'm seeing a whole bunch of no's. Oh, this should be on your bucket list for life, is to go see a lava flow. Find a lava flow to see. That's amazing. And go see a glacier. Go somewhere that you can go to Alaska. You can drive to Alaska, for goodness sakes. It's a long drive. I mean, it takes a few days, but it's possible. So it's relatively inexpensive to get there, meaning you don't have to fly and you don't have to take a ferry or anything. It's a spectacular trip too. You go through a lot of tribal areas and see a lot of native art, like the Tlingit that live along coastal Canada and Alaska. There's northern lights to see. I saw my first grizzly bear in Denali National Park. And glaciers are just, I mean, it's impressive. You know, and you get to see the scale of it. Not only that, but you also, you know, get to see with your own eyes that glaciers are shrinking. There's always a display at places where it's easy to get to glaciers. You know, they have interactive displays that show old photos of glaciers and how much longer they were. I'm going to show you a couple here, and then how they've receded now because temperatures have warmed up. Oh, I guess I just gave you kind of one. Okay, so back to this, like what determines whether glaciers grow or shrink? Temperature has something to do with it, right? The global temperatures do. Okay, where are we? All right, so glaciers are found today at high latitudes. There are small glaciers like in the mountains in the Cascade Range. Even in Sierra Nevada, there are small glaciers that are really high up on the north side, north facing slopes, because there's less sun there. They're exposed to less sun on the north facing slopes. Or you go to places like in the Arctic, like Greenland or Antarctica. Antarctica is on my bucket list. There are often calls for like scientists to end up going to Antarctica. So I'm doing that one day. Or high elevations like the Alps in Europe or the Andes Mountains. I'm an Oxford comma sort of person, so I'm putting that comma there. The Andes in South America or the Himalaya. But like I said, Cascades right here. And almost everywhere, there are a few places where glaciers are actually advancing, but most of them are receding. Alpine glaciers are the ones that happen in mountains. So this picture is a picture of an alpine glacier. So they come down these valleys, they're up high in the mountains, they're distinct, they're relatively small compared to like the continental glaciers, like the ones that cover Antarctica and the one that covers Greenland. That is, it's a continental scale glacier. It covers large regions of continents. I'm not saying it's all one glacier. I'm sure it's broken up in places, but that's different. They're both glaciers though. Okay, so just as an example, and I've showed you pictures of Yosemite before, but to explain like how it forms, here's what it would have looked like maybe 250,000 years ago, at the last, when continental ice came down to southern latitudes, when there was a huge amount of ice. So this is much larger glacial period than 20,000 years ago. I said before that the last ice age that we had, or the last glacial period that we had, was about 20,000 years ago. That's what it looked like here. So it was an alpine glacier. It was confined to the valley, but 250,000 years ago, everywhere was covered in ice, and Yosemite Valley was filled up with ice. And that's when the valley actually started to form. It continued to be carved out, you know, with each cycle. So anytime a glacier advances and recedes, it's causing erosion. It's scraping that rock and building up the moraines. So here you see like a medial moraine coming down. That's the mid. That's where that results from two glaciers coming together. right? So you can count how many glaciers come together by counting how many glaciers have moraines separating them, or medial moraines. I had a quiz question like that I was going to give you. I decided to not. Maybe it'll be a bonus one, but because it's kind of tricky. I can't explain without giving it away. So 10,000 years ago, after the ice had receded, this is as the globe, as Earth is warming up, there was a lake in Yosemite Valley. And then today, the glaciers are gone from Yosemite Valley, and there's a river that runs through it. And there are waterfalls that come down from former hanging valley. Well, they're still hanging valleys that come down from hanging valleys that form from smaller glaciers coming in, like up here. Here's a hanging valley that will become a hanging valley. It's a glacier that comes in to join the main glacier. And today it looks maybe like, one of a stream and a waterfall coming down the face of the mountains. And so what happens is, like, here's a profile look. Here's the bedrock in like this tan color. And this is with El Capitan, this mountain on that side. And don't worry about that one. No one's ever heard of that. There is a lot of sediment on the valley floor. Is that elevation? Highest? Yes, that's elevation. Okay, so no, that's not, that's thick ice thickness, I think. No, because elevation, that should be like 12,000 feet at that height, or at least 9,000 feet. No, that has to be the height of the ice. It was really, that's really thick. It's going from 3,900 feet to 7,000 feet. It's thousands of feet thick. That's huge. Anyway, there's a lot of sediment on the valley floor too, and that's why it's flat today. But if you were to remove that sediment, you would see a beautifully carved U-shaped valley. Today, it's a flattened U, but it's still there. Okay, so in the last glacial period, so as after 20,000 years ago, as the glaciers are receding, that means that Yosemite Valley, that glacier is pulling back, receding out of the valley. The Continental Glaciers that came down south of the Great Lakes into the US. So it's covers Canada and comes into the northern United States. That happened over the course of 18,000 years to about 1,000 years ago. So that was a long period where ice was, so yeah, what else is happening globally? Like, while all this ice is melting, what's happening to sea levels? Remember I said sea level and the ice that's locked up on land in these continental glaciers are related. So, this is a little video. I hope it works.
Sea
Yes.
levels rising as the
Yeah.
glaciers melt.
Exactly. Thank you. Sea levels are going to rise. So this is what it looked like from 18,000 to about 1,000 years ago. Okay. So this is Hudson Bay, which probably formed from a meteorite impact. It's pretty round right there. And this is 5,700 years ago. All right. There's the Great Salt Lake. Notice at the beginning, I'm going to show this to you again. Notice how there's so much water here in the Basin and Range Province. This is like the ancient Salt Lake was much larger. There were they're called Pluvial Lakes that happened during an ice age. There's lots of water on land, and some of that is in lake form, like after the glaciers receded, and as the ice is melting, you get lots of lake high stands. that dries up over this too. Some of those lakes are left behind, like Mono Lake is one, Pyramid Lake, which is just northeast of Reno, Nevada. Most of it is on a indigenous reservation, but I want to show this again. Okay, so the lakes are going to dry up. The Alpine glaciers in the Sierra Nevada are going to dry up. And then, of course, the Continental Glacier is going to recede back across Canada. All these lakes are forming and then drying up. Okay, cool. So for glaciers to grow, you have to have a rate of snow accumulation that is greater than the rate of melting, right? So it has to exceed the rate of melting in order to add to the glacier. So this analogy, like your bank account, if you want the money to grow, you have to have higher income than your expenditures. You need more. The income is the snowfall, the expenditures is the melting. So there you go. So here's an example. Okay, so this has there's this. I want you to make sure that you understand that there's a zone of accumulation that is up higher on the glacier. So that's up in the mountains where the more snowfall is happening. That's where the glacier accumulates the snow and starts to grow. That actually helps the flow of the glacier. It adds to the weight of the glacier. It helps to drive that flow along the base. So the flow is along the base of the ice. The base of the ice is deforming. It's kind of floating on a very thin layer of water, extremely thin, just enough to allow it to flow. And then you have this zone of depletion that's below the snow line where you're not accumulating snow. It's actually, that's the place where you get evaporation. So you're losing some snow to evaporation. If a glacier is stationary, then that means that the snowfall kind of is close to the amount of snow melt that's taking place. If your glacier is advancing, you have more snowfall than you do snow melting. And so the glacier actually moves downhill, at least in an alpine glacier. If it's retreating, then you have less snowfall up here and the glacial ice is actually moving back. So that line where the terminal moraine is, it pulls back and it leaves behind it sort of a number of moraines, terminal moraines that you can see and follow kind of its progression. Today, like looking at it today and seeing a glacier maybe that's still high up in the mountains and the evidence that it was down where you're standing, like looking at the moraines themselves. If you've ever been to Yosemite, who's been to Yosemite? I'm going to clear, let me clear your responses. Has anyone been to Yosemite?
I have. I used to go every summer.
Oh, nice. Yeah, me too. It used to be the family vacation on one side of my family. Totally.
But the bears started to bother me.
Oh, no. Oh, they leave you alone as long as you don't like tempt them with food. You're all right. You just have to lock your food in your car.
Yeah, I just seen one this weekend at Lake Tahoe.
Oh, really? A black
Yeah.
bear, I assume. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't do anything though because they're used to seeing people.
Totally. Where people are, they leave behind trash and the bears come running. Yeah, you have to be careful. I've had to camp where you camp in like a triangle. You sleep in one place, you cook and eat in another place, and you clean up in a third place. And that's to like keep the food smells away from where you're sleeping. And then you store your food in a special bear canister that's really round. It's like a round, really tough plastic. And you screw on the lid and lock it down. And so if a bear gets at it, they can't, it's too slippery. They can't like get a hold on it. And so your food is safe, and you can put it up in a tree, also hang your food. It's kind of a pain in the ass. Bears are a pain in the ass, but I like that. I mean, I think they should stay around. Okay. I think I was going to say something about, just if you keep going on Highway 120 and cross the Sierra Nevada, you'll come to Mono Lake. And on the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada, once you're there, you're over the rain shadow, which means that most of the rain falls on the west side of the Sierra Nevada. But on the east side, on the Basin and Range side, or the Nevada side, it's dry, it's desert-like. I don't think it counts as actual desert, but it's certainly similar. Tumbleweeds and all that. But there's so much evidence just laid out before you of the old glacial history. You can see giant moraines coming out of the mountains. You can see the old, I call them bathtub rings, where the old lake high stand used to be. You can see it up on the mountains, and how huge the lake was in the past. So it's like seeing it's geologic history right before your eyes. It's pretty cool. Yeah, if I taught this class in person, we would be taking field trips, and there could be a weekend field trip like that. I love that place. Okay, so some terminology. So there's some glacial features. These are erosional landforms. Like this is an example of like Everest is a horn. It's one of these points. It's a pointed peak where you had glaciers coming down from all different sides, and it sort of forms like a pointed peak. An arête would be this like knife edge ridge. Oh, I didn't even read that. I just totally said that myself. It's a thin, skinny ridge that separates two glacial valleys, basically. So a glacier would be here, a glacier would be there, and dividing them would be this arête. Meanwhile, there's a U-shaped valley where the glacial valley was. A cirque is like this a scooped out shape where the glacial ice still remains sometimes up high in the mountains. It's like it's supposed to be like this circus. A circus. It's I don't know, like an amphitheater. Yeah, it's like an amphitheater kind of shape. That could be also where you find tarns, like the glacial lakes. So those are all different landforms. You can see, okay, so these are some pictures of Greenland taken from the air. So this, like when you fly from the United States to Europe, or to England specifically in this case, you often take a route that goes over Greenland because it's a shorter line to go across the northern latitudes than it is to go around like along a latitude. Look at a globe sometime or think about that, but really that's what happens. You fly over Canada, you fly over Greenland and Iceland, and then you drop down into Europe. This is a continental glacier. So you see the mountain peaks are sticking out of it. This is kind of what the parts of Antarctica look like as well. There's some glaciers up in the mountains still, like this is the snow line here. There's a glacier that's probably receding from this lake. Yeah, I'm just like the edges of these continental glaciers look more like the Alpine glaciers. Okay, so I guess the point of this is before a glacial period, what a landscape would look like is kind of a typical non-glaciated landscape would look like. You've got V-shaped valleys, not U-shaped valleys, but they're sharply cut down from like rivers eroding the landscape. And the glaciers are going to form up high first in the mountains, and they're going to flow down these tributary valleys. So a tributary is one of these side streams that's in a watershed. So an area where the water falls. All of the little tributaries are the smaller streams that feed into a larger river. So there would be little tributaries here that might be seasonal creeks, or they might be rivers that are year round, but they feed into a larger stream. So that's before. After, you've got glaciers forming in all of those valleys, in the tributary valleys and in the main river valley. And then in the end, this is kind of like what you see in Yosemite, is a U-shaped valley where the main river was. That was the main glacier. And so all of that glacial ice on the side was feeding into the main glacier while it was growing. It was carving out a huge U-shaped valley. And then all of these little glacial valleys, so you have small U-shaped valleys up here. And now this is where the waterfalls form, from these hanging valleys up here where, yeah, so now they form just like a cliff's edge between the hanging valley and the U-shaped valley. So when you go up to Yosemite next time, or if you haven't been there in the future, you should notice how U-shaped the valley is, even more so than this one. This is in the Alps in Switzerland. But everywhere you go where there was a glacier, you have U-shaped valleys. There could be glaciers up here, like right in here, in there. Those could be small glaciers that maybe don't look so small when you're up close. Okay, so here's a hanging valley. So that was one of the tributaries into the before landscape, and now it's forms a waterfall at that cliff edge where the side glacier fed into the main glacier. I think you can imagine that better now. Here's a cartoon kind of showing that again. I think you get the idea. If not, you should ask a question, please, or raise your hand over there. Here are, this is called Glacial Polish. So glaciers actually can they scrape so much that they can polish the rock underneath them, and you can catch the sun glinting off of these highly polished rocks. Or you might see chatter marks. These are places where the ice gets stuck and it catches, and it does it erodes the rock in this way where you get these circular little fractures. Or you get striations. Do you see these lines here? There are lines that go in this direction on the rock. Those grooves are that tell you the direction of flow of the glacier. Okay, here. All right, so this is what the landscape looks like now. There are there are lots of domes that have formed in the granite where ice had covered the tops of. The places where you see the arêtes and the horns are peaks that stood up above the glacial ice when it was there. And then the domes are forming because the ice flowed over the tops of those. And so they look smooth. The granite itself starts to break down. It has been weathered a lot, and so it can erode. It can form these, like I told you how the feldspars start to break down. The micas in particular, the muscovite and biotite, they turn to clay. And so you get this like sandy material that is just this weathered granite. And if you were to pick up some of that sand, you would see it looks very much like what the sand on Ocean Beach looks like today. Some of the same minerals. Okay, so here is, oh, I shouldn't say, I have a question for you. So this is in the Andes. I guess it's already labeled, so I'll just explain. So what happened here? There's a couple of episodes in the geologic history of this area that you can tell from the picture. You see a U-shaped valley. It's kind of a broad U-shaped valley there. And then today there's a creek coming out of here. And that river or creek forms a V-shaped valley that cuts down through the U-shaped valley. So this is like one of the laws of cross-cutting relationships that we talked about at the very beginning of this class. So that had to happen later. So you had this glaciation, and then probably the glacier is still melting today, and that's what's feeding this creek. But the water then cut down through those glacial sediments and the rock to form the V-shaped valley now. Okay, some more terminology. Here are, okay, how many glaciers came together to form what we see here? Here's a good quiz question for you. I gave you a tip in an earlier slide, and I said you could count the number of glaciers basically by how many medial moraines separate them. So to form this landscape, and I realize you can't see the side there, but here's one medial moraine separating two glaciers. Here's two more medial moraines. Looks like there's a bit of ice there. Should I call that one? Maybe that should be called one medial moraine. I think maybe that's fair. Here's another, there's a lateral moraine here that is kind of a medial moraine, but that goes all the way back. So I would call this a separate glacier from this. So how many glaciers came together to form this one massive glacier? 3. Okay, I have a vote for 3. And I'm gonna guess for UK that you are counting this one, and this one?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Anyone else? Okay, Shivani, what did you add to that?
The corner one you mentioned that you said next to the lateral moraine, the ice.
Totally. Yeah, it's small, but it's there. Yeah, so 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this one, even like it's hard to tell where that's going. It looks like it even dies out there. But anyway, the point is, yes, there was a side glacier that joined this glacier back up there. And so there's a medial moraine coming down there. They're not always perfectly centered, right? It depends on the landscape where they come in. But here are 2 coming together. Those 2 join another one, and those join a 4th. I was wondering whether this was another one. Like, we probably should count. It probably should be 5, honestly, because look at this. There's another hunk of ice, another glacier coming down here, and it's separating, just like this one. There's a medial moraine separating that glacier from that. So I bet the same thing is happening up valley from here. So I'm going to change my mind. I think there are 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, that's how I would read that. So thank you for your votes. Here's a glacier that is littered with crevasses, all these fractures in the ice. It's coming down steeply here. And here's the end moraine, or the terminal moraine to this one. It looks like it was one of these side glaciers, and it was feeding into a larger one where this main lake is. Do you notice the watercolor is very blue? And it looks kind of cloudy. Does anyone have an idea why it looks so blue and cloudy?
Minerals dissolved in the
Sure.
water.
What'd you say?
Minerals dissolved in the water.
Yes, that's true. Can you be more specific about what happened, or somebody?
The glaciers, sediment that was weathered eroded and was carried into the water.
Yes.
and it dissolved in the
Yes.
minerals or whatever elements were present in the minerals
Yeah,
changed
yeah,
the
yeah.
color of the water.
Totally. Except it's a little simpler than that because it's just the crushed rock. It's literally the powdered crushed rock from the base of the glacier that gets into the water. So yes, it's literally minerals, but it's not like they're not dissolved necessarily, and it's not contributing chemically. It's a physical process, this powder, rock powder in that water. So you shouldn't drink that. You should filter it, and it's going to kill your water filter if you try to filter glacial water like this because of all the rock powder that's in the water. But yeah, if you ever run into a place with that's bright blue water, like sudden change, and you're high up in the mountains, it's probably this rock powder. Thank you for contributing. Glacial flour. That's the term I was looking for, not rock powder, glacial flour. Same idea. It's the very fine crushed rock or silt that's in the lake that causes that color. Here's another glacier up in the mountains. What's that? It's kind of a U-shaped valley. There's the stream coming down. So the terminal moraine must be down here somewhere that is blocking the flow of this stream that's coming out of the glacier, right? This is melting, contributing this water. That's why it has this color to it, is because it has the dissolved rock powder in it. And then a moraine, a terminal moraine down here is keeping it from draining away. There's a lot of sediment. And so you get like a braided stream. It's kind of it's not a straight path down to the lake. It is a sinuous path. It curves, and there are like multiple parts to it. It's called a braided stream. And that's because it has so much sediment. The water has to go through so much sediment compared to how much water there is. Okay. All this happened, you know, we have evidence of this in South America, and there's this beautiful place that I haven't been here. I want to go badly. Oh, what's its name again? There, Torres del Paine. This one, my Spanish is probably not great. This is gorgeous. It's not all the way down, but there's some fantastic stuff that you can do as a tourist. But these are fjords. These are considered fjords in the tip of South America, kind of like Norway even. The landscape is just beautiful. Still lots of glaciers. And of course, it was covered 20,000 years ago. I'm going to go through some of these pictures kind of quickly just because they're descriptive. This is part of the moraine material. I think I've used this image before to show the very large boulders that come out of glacial, like that glaciers carry. And it's poorly sorted, lots of different size particles in this sediment. So everything from very small silt size particles to boulders. Here's another glacial erratic. So when in this field, like check this out, like this field here. When a glacier retreats and melts, any boulders that are stuck in the ice will fall out and be deposited wherever they melt out of the ice. And so suddenly you'll have this random rock that doesn't have anything to do with the rocks around it on this landscape. And so that's what happened here. And it looks really funny, doesn't it? So huge size, and the different rock composition tells you that those rocks don't belong where they are and that they are erratics. Check out the blue color to the lake again. That's glacial outwash that gives it that, the glacial flour that does that. Here's a beautiful arête, these knife-edged ridge, and it really is knife-edged. This is a lake in a cirque. All of this rock, look how polished that is. The last little bit of glacial ice that's up there is melting and forming these little waterfalls. And here's a lateral moraine on the side with big angular pieces of rock in it. Oh, psh. We're running out of time today, so I'm not going to stop and ask you to identify these features. That's why I'm cruising through this. A quick note to say, you can be a glaciologist. That is a job. People go on cruises to study Antarctic ice. There are people at Portland State that study glaciers in the Sierra Nevada. University of Washington and British Columbia study the glaciers in the Pacific Northwest. Here's these are LiDAR images. So LiDAR is kind of like, what was the old, shoot, the CHP used to point guns at you to measure speed. Now they use radar. It's like radar, but LiDAR is more accurate. And so we can use LiDAR technology to actually to see landscapes, and it sees through all the vegetation if there was any. But do you see the glacier here? Here's the glacier in 2007, 2008. There's the toe of the glacier. Look where it is in this one. It's gone. It's up here. So this was in 2015, so it's still 5 years since. So in that 7 years, the glacier retreated that much. This is over 400 meters or 1,200 feet. It's a long ways. University of Alaska Fairbanks also does a lot of glacier studies. So there's certain universities where you could go do graduate work and actually get to the field and study glaciers. I've even seen like undergraduate field experiences that you can go to that are like fully financially supported that will get undergrads out on glacial ice, like in Canada. Look out for opportunities like that. You never know where life is going to like turn you in one direction or the other. Okay, so I showed you the movie of this. I don't think we need to do this again. This is the time-lapse sequence about how the Continental Glacier receded until what it is today is basically covering Greenland only, but all the ice has melted across Canada. Okay, I'm going to skip through those. Hang on. I want to hit the highlights. I'll leave. This is one of, okay. So this is Pyramid Lake. I was just telling you about this. This is one of those pluvial lakes that used to exist when we had the last ice age. And it actually formed a giant lake. So this is Tahoe and Pyramid Lake is right here. But 13,000 years ago, Pyramid Lake was joined by all this giant Lake Lahontan. Black Rock Desert is right up there. So that's part of this old lake that existed as the ice was melting out of the last ice age 20,000 years ago. So you can still see evidence of all of this, bathtub rings and everything. There's 2 foot of lookout. This water is really cold, but you can jump in it and it's pretty fantastic. And there's a field trip that goes out there with Quaternary Climate and Soils class. Okay. The one thing I'll say here are that, okay, so this is talking about using the sediments that come out of the mountains and that end up in the ocean, and how those sediments or the marine animals, in this case, this is a foraminifera or foraminiferum, if there's one, they make their shells out of calcium, out of calcite, and that's calcium carbonates. Calcium is CaCO3. 2. And the oxygen that's part of the calcium carbonate can be measured for oxygen isotopes. When we have a glacial period, there are 2 isotopes. So there's oxygen 16 and oxygen 18. 18 is slightly heavier than oxygen 16. And that means that when you get evaporation off of the ocean, it preferentially takes the oxygen 16 and puts the oxygen 16 into the ice that's on land. So the O16 comes out and then precipitates snows or rains on the landscape with the glaciers or with the snowpack. And that leaves the oxygen 18 behind in the ocean water. And so you can measure like either your sediments or in the shells of these bugs, measure the ratio of oxygen 16 to oxygen 18 and reconstruct climate, because you can estimate sea surface temperatures or even paleo elevations of the mountains to see, like, because you have certain temperatures at certain elevations, you can calculate those temperatures out of these ratios. So there's lots of cool stuff that can be done. There are cores that are done out of the ice caps. So this is an ice cap in Peru that was taken, an ice core that are stored in these tubes. He's wearing gloves and everything because he's in a giant freezer where all of this is stored. And so paleoclimatologists use these ice cores by studying the carbon dioxide content in them, by looking at the O16, O18 ratio. Sometimes there is actually trapped air bubbles inside the ice, and that's ancient air. So you can actually measure the air from 20,000 years ago, which is really fucking cool, right? That's really cool. Okay. Okay, so this is the oxygen 18, oxygen 16 ratio. You always put the 18, the heavier isotope first when you describe these ratios. And what you see is, okay, so this is supposed to be high oxygen 16 on the top and low oxygen 16 on the bottom. So high oxygen 16 tells you glacial period or interglacial period. If you're taking, this is taken from the ocean sediment, or these animals in their shells. So check it out. Check out the curve. Think about that question. The O16 is high when we have less glacial ice and low when we have more glacial ice. So in between, so when we have low oxygen 16, this is a glacial period. So that's an ice age. Less glacial ice, this would be the peak of the interglacial period. So the highest temperature parts of the interglacial. So there's kind of a cycle here, but this is 21,000 years ago. This is about 120,000 years ago, maybe 140,000 years ago, then 240, 250, then 330. So there's a cycle, and we can measure that through these ancient sediments or through the ice cores to figure out what was going on Earth over time. So there are natural temperature fluctuations on Earth, and we have these warmer periods that are the interglacials, and we have colder periods. Notice where we are today. We're on sort of in between. It's going towards a higher O16 value. Okay. So when this is going on, so this is depth below present sea level in meters, and this is years before present. So we've got today, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and we can use these cycles to look at sea level rise. So sea level is rising when the glaciers are melting, right? So we should have a highest sea level stand at the interglacial, at the warmest periods, and the lowest sea levels during the ice ages, because more of that water is locked on land, right? So we're seeing temperature fluctuations, sea level fluctuations, and these glacial period fluctuations all together that work together. Okay, that's all I want to say about that one, honestly. Let me get, okay, we're so close to the end. I have a bunch of pictures at the end to show you, but let me get through the climate stuff, the Milankovitch cycle, and then I'll let you go. Okay, we're close to 12, but we can do this. We can get through the whole lecture. All right. So the Milankovitch cycle that I mentioned at the very beginning and that you read about in your textbook, right? These are cycles that affect the amount of incoming solar radiation onto Earth. So this is determined by the tilt of the Earth's axis. So look at how, so here's the North Pole and the South Pole. We're not like completely vertical. We're at some angle to the sun. So the Earth rotates around the sun in 1 year, and the equinoxes are equal nights, right? That's what the equinox means, is equal night. That means same amount of time at night, of nighttime and daytime. So that's the spring and the autumn. So September 21st, March 21st, thereabouts. The winter solstice is December 21st. That's the shortest day and the longest night. And then the summer solstice, which is like June 20th, the more of the northern hemisphere is tilting towards the sun. So northern hemisphere tilting towards the sun, we get more solar radiation. Northern hemisphere axis tilting away from the sun, we get less solar radiation. And it's the opposite for the southern hemisphere, right? But I'm just going to talk about the northern hemisphere. That tilt angle can change. It changes a little bit. There's a bit of a wobble to Earth's rotation and Earth's behavior. So there's sort of a minimum tilt of about 22.1 degrees and a maximum tilt of about 24.5 degrees towards the sun. Right now we're about 23.5. And that gives us, that change in tilt gives us cycles that are on about a 41,000 year cycle between warmer, that give you warmer summers and colder summers. The maximum tilt would be the warmest summers. The colder summers would be the minimum tilt. And that's where you get this tilt angle. So minimum tilt, maximum tilt. And you have that cycle. Oops, I didn't mean to go away just yet. And then the shape of Earth's orbit and the wobble of that rotational axis is on a 100,000 year cycle. And I've got that, it should be in the next slides. The shape of the orbit, so right, this orbit here, and the wobble of the rotational axis. So how that wobbles. I should have put that after these, at least. Let me go here first. I think I want to do that. Well, okay. Let's start here where I was. All right. So you know about global warming. I hope you know about global warming and how the radiation is trapped by our atmosphere, and the gases that we produce in production, in just like factories and in exhaust from our cars and in just living a modern life, we give off carbon dioxide that is one of these greenhouse gases that helps to warm the atmosphere. And so the concentration of and it's methane, it's carbon dioxide, it's sulfur dioxide. There are a lot of carbon monoxide. There are a whole bunch of compounds that contribute to their greenhouse gases. When they increase in the atmosphere, because we burn fossil fuels and just other, that's industry, that's the word I was looking for. Industrialization, that causes more of these gases to be released. And we trap more of that in our atmosphere. It causes warming of the atmosphere. There's some radiation that bounces off the atmosphere. Remember I talked about in volcanic eruptions, how the aerosols that are given off from the volcanic eruption, they stay in the atmosphere for like 1 to 5 years sometimes, depending on the size of the eruption. And that actually blocks some radiation. So the radiation bounces off of those aerosols and it ends up cooling Earth a little bit. But when the solar radiation passes through, that's when we get this warming. And that radiation from the Earth bounces back. Okay, so the carbon dioxide variations that we see that are part of that industrialization has risen. We can see it's an unnatural amount of carbon dioxide. So if we look at the carbon dioxide from ice cores, for example, you would see variations, and this is in parts per, MV. I'm not sure what the V stands for. This is ppm is parts per million. I wonder if V was a mistake. Okay, so these are parts per million in like an ice core. You would measure these natural variations that got up to like 300 parts per million. But today we're already at like 400 parts per million. And that's because of the human contribution. So we're changing the natural cycle. And I just wanted to make sure that you know that no matter what your politics are, the science says that humans are contributing carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases to the Earth, and that's causing, this is causing warming. So look at the temperature. So this is departures from temperature. So the 0 line here, and that's based on, what is that based on? Okay, so it's an average from 1961 to 1990 average temperature, and then looking in the past. So we had the year, I guess they stopped, this must have been done before. Sorry, I meant to find a newer version of this diagram. It goes the same way. We're at 2020 now up here. So we have these measurements for temperature. But just notice that if you go back in time to 1800 to 1600, back to 1000 AD, temperatures were cooler. We were kind of we're on the side of an ice age here. But look at what has happened since 1900, when that happens to coincide with industrialization, right? Around 1900, we started to see a departure from that natural variation of Earth's surface temperatures. And look how it's increased now. So we're at I think now we're over a degree warmer than this average that we calculated. So it is an unnatural amount of heat that is resulting from those global warming gases, those greenhouse gases. That has an effect on precipitation. So that affects the amount of erosion. It affects the glaciers. It affects the hydrosphere, the sea level, and what's going on land, the biosphere as well. If we look at today, here's projected temperatures. And so here's that 0. This is temperature change from this 1980, 1999 range, which is 0. And this is increasing 1 degree, 2 degrees, and this is Celsius. So these are more than a degree Fahrenheit, 3 degrees up to 7 degrees. So this is through 2030, and we're seeing warmer, a lot warmer temperatures in the Arctic, which is bad because that's where a lot of our ice is, the water that's on land, right? That's locked up in the ice. In 2046 to 2065, I'll be alive. Look at the temperatures. It's 4 to 5 degrees warmer in the Arctic. And toward the end of our century, if we don't change something, we're looking at melting. We're gonna melt the continental ice. We're gonna melt the glaciers. We're gonna melt the sea ice in the Antarctic. Look at the Antarctic. We're going to melt the Antarctic ice shelf. What is that going to do to sea level? It's going to, I'll show you what's going to happen to places like this, islands out in the Pacific Ocean. With those temperature changes, by the end of the century, these islands will be gone, period. No one can live there. Let's see what else I have. There are, already we see glacial retreat. Here's in 1900, this is a painting of what this glacier, it's called the Rhone Glacier, it's in Switzerland, what it looked like in 1900. Look at what it looks like today. Here it is, it's dirty, it's covered in stuff, but it ends right there. It's shrunk a huge amount. This is the same vantage point. Here's 1950 and 1750, what it might have looked like. So 1950, this glacier was here. In 1750, it should have been all the way down the valley. Sea ice breaks up earlier. That's going to have an effect on sea surface temperatures. The species that live in these polar regions are going to have their habitats change. The environment that they live in is going to change. Low-lying areas, even around the Bay Area, like the coastal areas, aren't so bad. Like some places are low-lying, but we've got coastal cliffs, so we're protected to some extent. Except that, go inside the Golden Gate and look at, there's a lot of low-lying land. We've built on places that used to be water. We've put artificial fill into those places, like Foster City and some of the runways on the San Francisco airport are landfill. Those would be covered in water. In fact, let's just look at what just the changes in the last 18,000 years. I've showed you a video like this before, but look at where our coastline was 18,000 years ago. Here's San Francisco, and instead of a bay, we have this valley with rivers and streams running through it that led out through the Golden Gate. We play the movie, you'll see that with sea level rise, we had 19 miles of coast out here. That shrinks. And then the bay fills up. And we get what it looks like today. And it was even higher stand for a while, right? And then, so that would be at a glacial high stand or a glacial low stand. When there's the most water in the oceans, what's happening on land with ice? So around 2,000 years ago, water levels were higher. Does that mean global temperatures were warmer or colder?
Well, if there's more water, that means that the glaciers are melting, meaning that temperatures are rising.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So this scenario, what it looks like there, today we have this, okay? So we have these San Jose, Palo Alto, Mountain View, they're all in this low-lying, like Google's right there, right? All this low-lying land where the rivers are. But with sea level rise, if we allow global temperatures to keep rising, if we don't affect the pollution that we're making, it's going to look more like this by the time we get out of this century. And so that means like Foster City's gone. We'll have to relocate the runways and the airport. Looks like maybe the ball field is gone. Alviso's gone. The East Palo Alto part of it's gone. I don't know the names of these places up here in the northern part, but that's a lot of land that gets covered by relatively small amount of water or sea level increase. Okay, so that was like kind of just a warning. I'm going to skip that part. Oh, I did it. I got to the end. Okay, just my last little spiel. I talked about being able to study paleoclimate. I talked about going on these ocean cruises, doing the seafloor drilling. You don't do it, that guy does it. But you would stand in the lab and you pack up, you slice half the core apart, you study and document what you see in the core. And you can pull out pollen out of these sediments to study. You can look at these microscopic shells of these sea animals, sea bugs, and look at their shells, measure the oxygen and carbon isotopes in their shells to study climate. Zan, I told you, is using on land studies, using tree rings. Like what gets used, it's the, oh, I'm not gonna, the bristlecone pine. Those are really old trees. They get studied a lot because they've been around for a long time. And so they record a climate history. But we can go back into lots of trees that are up in the high elevations of the Sierra Nevada or whatever mountains. You core into these tree rings and you can study the tree rings to get information about climate. Yes, I'm so glad we covered, I skipped a few slides, but basically you got the idea. And so that was my whole goal, was to give you like a rundown on glaciers and on climate and global warming and how that all interrelates. And we're there. Are there questions? I know I covered a lot fast too, but I was hoping that you came into this having read the chapter too. Any questions? If there are none, I'll just remind you, try to do that, your experiment for your lab. See if you can do that tonight or tomorrow and bring some results to class on Thursday. Otherwise, we'll talk about groundwater and surface water on Thursday and finish off the semester. So thank you, and I'll see you Thursday. I'll stick around still for questions if you have any.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay, Google, turn on KQED radio.